turn now, Jeff.
All right. Well, good afternoon. And thank you, Lindsay, for asking me to be a presenter here in this Cut Flower webinar series. So short introduction of myself. I'm based out of Western New York. I work for Rupp Seed Company as a vegetable consultant salesman, but I also am a grower and operate a family vegetable farm here south of Rochester, where we grow vegetables and cut flowers and market through a on-farm farm market we've been here a little over 40 years. And so over the years, the farm has morphed into started as a small roadside vegetable stand. And about 30 years ago, approximately, we started selling some sunflowers, cut sunflowers. And that kind of started a monster in itself of what customers were asking for. And it's gradually built over the 30 years from sunflowers into, we do about 2 acres of cut flowers on the farm, an acre of mixed and an acre of sunflowers. So when Lindsay asked me to do this webinar, she has seen me present before, and I like sharing my knowledge with other growers about the ins and outs of starting transplants, because I grew up, we have greenhouses also where we do spring bedding plants, and I've learned a lot over the years of how to start seeds and how to get a good viable seedling ready for field transplant. And I know growers, sometimes growers struggle. There's not always a lot of information out there. It's getting better. But sharing my knowledge and things I've learned along the way, I appreciate it when I'm asked. So we'll go through a bunch of slides, have some fun with some slides, and at the end, as Lindsay said, we'll do questions. So this first slide here is, this is a common thing that I run across as I visit growers, and they say, well, the seed was no good on these varieties. And one thing I can't stress enough is, I think in a previous webinar, they talked about seed quality and what's on the package as far as germination percentage. And spending about 20 years, 25 years in the seed industry now, I have learned a lot about seed quality, federal seed laws, how seed is packaged, how seed is handled, stored, humidity. And generally, when I have a problem in my greenhouse, I don't always point the finger at the seed company. I always figure, okay, what did I do wrong? Because on the package, it said 92%, and I should have gotten 92%. And I've worked in germ labs and seed companies, spent quite a few years doing seed germination tests and following those federal laws. So anyways, when a grower called me a few years ago and he says, you need to get to my greenhouse. This is zucchini squash, but I walked in the greenhouse and I said, well, this is not a seed problem. This is your problem. And we'll come back to this slide at the end, but I want you, I guess through the process here of me explaining of germination and everything that can happen to a seed, once you understand how to start the seeds and get them to transplant stage, it'll take some of the responsibility, I guess, off the seed company and put it on the grower. And that's not, every once in a while something can happen in transition, but I've learned a lot over the years. So this is what we're after. We want good quality seedlings. So what are the pros and cons of starting your own versus buying in plugs? Well, when you start your own, the pros are that you can look at all the different varieties, and generally there's more varieties in the seed catalog than what the plug producers will offer. Plug producers tend to stick to the mainstream varieties and don't have some of the unique cuts and perennials and different things that you might want to try. What's the con of starting all your own? Well, you have to know how to start them. You got to have greenhouse space. You got to have some infrastructure of benching and heating and lighting. And you also have to have the knowledge. What are the pros of ordering in the plugs? You can just go through a catalog, order the plugs when you want, have a delivery date, and they show up on your doorstep pretty much ready to go, or you may have to harden them off a little bit. What are the cons of ordering from a plug producer? Well, this is where we have a little fun. So this is how the boxes sometimes show up, that here you've ordered, and live plants do not always ship well. Or you get to the back of the delivery truck and your boxes are sitting there like that. Or in this case here. So generally, a lot of times you want to ship plugs. If you're getting some young plugs, you could have a March or April storm. It got delayed. The shipment got delayed. You had an appointment. You've left notes on your greenhouse door, on your door that you always go in and out at your house, and say, look, please put the shipment in my greenhouse. You knew the shipment was coming, but you just couldn't be there. And but what you didn't have control over is a substitute driver that day. They had no idea, and they dropped them on your front step that you never use. And 3 hours later, you find the shipment and it's frozen. So, and this is where I speak from experience. So I have had multiple frozen shipments over the years. And not always because I missed the shipment, but who knows how long the shipment sat in a warehouse or cross-docked someplace. So you call the plug supplier, and generally they will answer. But the problem is they can't always backfill that order, that lost shipment. Maybe you'll have to wait another 2 or 3 weeks. They'll try to find a tray here. They'll try to find a tray there. Now you're taking colors and varieties that you necessarily didn't want, and it really is going to start messing up your crop timing, your crop plan, if you had a business plan of certain colors and for whether weddings, parties, or whatever. So after 2 or 3 frozen shipments, this is I pretty much had enough and said, okay, I'm going to start raising more of my own plugs. And so anyways, like I said, if you call the plug producer or the broker, you always wonder where your phone call goes. Well, this is where it goes. It just goes out in outer space sometime. You're wondering, okay, they're not returning my phone call. They may be working on it in the back, but you've got this on your mind. It's front and center. So I can't say enough. Plug producers are great. Brokers are great when they work, but they don't have control over everything. Plug producers have gotten so much better in the last 20 years with packaging and insulation, styrofoam, but there's still issues. So this is a picture actually of one of our starter houses about 30 years ago. And in this starter house, I have no idea, 60, 70 different varieties, species of flowers, herbs. And I have one heat source, I have one water source, and they don't look too bad in this picture, but some things were tall, some things were short. I was moving things by the heater, trying to germinate up by the heater. The things that were cooler, I needed to move down to the other end of the greenhouse, and it was challenging. So, but not, but challenging, but not overwhelmed. Let's put it that way. And so I figured I would continue starting my own. And since then, we have different greenhouses. We have zones in the greenhouse where we move things, where if some seedlings are a little cooler, some are a little warmer. And that's how we maneuver through all of our spring transplants. The goal with a transplant and seedling is the process from germination to a seedling should be very fluid, very even, um, pretty fast or rapid. The without a lot of bumps in the road. When you have some issues with the seedlings, those issues generally, most always, will carry on all the way to flowering or fruiting. So I tell growers as you set up your germination houses, your nursery houses for starting seeds, the person in your operation that has the most attention to detail is the person that you want handling your seed starting, because it's almost like taking care of an infant. It requires attention on a regular basis, and making sure that they're happy. And seedlings are no different. You want to make sure that your soil temperature is correct. You want to make sure your moisture is correct. Your lighting is correct. And this is where I ask the question sometimes when I do in person, is growing an art or a science? And it's always, I have fun with it because it's some will raise their hand that it's an art. Most will raise it with that it's a science. It is a combination of both. No question about it. Over all my years of growing, is a science is okay. We start with good quality seed. We have the temperature, the soil temperature right. The everything is right going forward. But we get a snowstorm, we have low light levels, we have maybe a heater goes out, maybe we have just infrastructure issues, and that's where the art comes in. Or maybe they're growing a little bit too fast, so you've got to back it off a little bit. Maybe you've run into some really wet spring weather, and when you get to that full-size transplant, you need to hold it for a few weeks. So that's where, if the art comes in, that you say, okay, well, I'm going to back off on my feed. I'm going to back off on temperature a little bit to hold that seedling. So there's three things that seedlings need to germinate. And again, I ask the audience usually, what are the three things, for a show of hands? And I'll have people, say water. Yes, absolutely. We need water to start the process of germination. We also need oxygen, and we need temperature. And usually the one that is forgotten most on this is oxygen. And most people will say soil. We need soil to germinate. And although soil is important in the germination process, because that you're keeping your soil temperature, and that's what holds the moisture for the seed to swell and start the process. You really don't need soil to germinate a seed. You could germinate a seed on a tabletop if you really wanted to. And so these three items, water, oxygen, and temperature, in sequence, in combination, but they all have to be at the proper levels to get that seed to germinate. Where do you look for information? Well, I pulled this worksheet up. This is from Cicada Seed on asters. And most seed companies have germination information worksheets, tech sheets that you can ask for or find on their websites. And some will put it on their seed packages, but the seed packages are limited sometimes on the amount of information they can put on the label. So don't be afraid to reach out to the various seed companies and ask for specifics on a particular cultivar or species. As you grow, and as I've grown myself on my farm and added new items, it's one of the first things I do is, okay, I want to add asters. Well, where do I find information on asters? Well, I'll go to the seed catalogs, but then I'll also go to the breeding companies' websites, and I will see if they have particular information. And then I'll base my crop timing around these tech sheets. So on these tech sheets, it will give you germination temperatures, growing on temperatures, weeks as a transplant, if it's 4 to 6 weeks usually. It will also help you with pH. It will also give you some tips and tricks at the end. It will tell you maybe back off on the feed as the transplant grows, or maybe increase the feed. So as a grower, as you're adding things, look for these tech sheets and see how they're going. Here's one I just pulled up. This happens to be in the RUP catalog. I know this is a cut flower seminar, Lindsay, but I love pointing out the germination of onions. That onions will germinate at 32 degrees soil temperature. You'll get 90%, but it takes 136 days. You go over to 68 degrees soil temperature, you'll get 99% germination in 5 days. And that goes back to, if you have everything lined up properly, the faster you can get that seed to germinate, literally you're setting the stage for your crop down the road. And so as you start your different cultivars, some may need 68 degrees, some may need 75. One thing I have learned over the years is once you hit 92 to 95 degrees or anything over 90 degrees soil temperature, you either send the seed back into dormancy or you will kill the viability of that seed. So again, attention to detail, monitoring your soil temperatures are very important. Seed coatings, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but seed coatings are pretty much meant for seed to flow easily through mechanical planters or vacuum planters. They're really nothing to be worried about. They're on there for just the ease of seeding. Pelleted seed. On pelleted seed, this is where I've run into personally a few issues over the years. Is you have the seed and then you have a buildup of material on the outside. It's usually bonded together with some type of glue. And some of it's a clay-based material. And how these pellets are to work is that the water is to absorb through that outer coating of the pellet into where the seed is. The seed then swells and breaks that pellet open to allow oxygen into the seed to then start to trigger the germination metabolism of the seed. A problem I had a few years back is I had some tomato seed that was pelleted and I watered it too heavily. And the outer coating of that clay-based material actually became like a mud. And the seed did swell because the seed took on moisture. But as the seed swelled, the pellet casing around the outside didn't crack open because it was too wet. And it just expanded with the seed, not allowing oxygen in. And the tomato seed sat there for about 2 weeks. And I knew something was wrong. I knew it wasn't the seed. I knew the germ was good on the seed. And I asked a colleague, and I said, I'm doing something wrong. And he said, wash the coating off as much as you can. It's probably too wet. I went home and I rinsed the seeds as much as I could, watered it as heavy as I could. And within 3 days, germination started, and my tomatoes were fine. They ended up a fine crop. But pelleted seed is tricky. Even as a seasoned grower, it is still tricky for me. Marigold seed, this is an easy one. So the tail on there, if you're hand sowing, it's not that much of a problem. They're actually a little bit bigger, easier to work with, but a lot of marigold seed comes detailed now, and that tail is cut off. So to, again, work through mechanical planters and also to fit cell size and to singulate a little bit easier. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but this is people that are starting perennials and pre-chilling. If you're starting lavenders, rosemary, or excuse me, any type of perennials, make sure that you pre-chill the seed and have a little bit of knowledge. Ask your supplier, seed supplier, about how long you should chill certain types of seeds. Again, rosemary, lavender, I generally chill for 7 to 10 days. I just put them in the freezer in a Ziploc bag, and that's how I'm pre-chilling them. But I know there's grasses and some ornamentals require either a shorter or a longer day, and it's going to be specific to what you're starting. And again, basically that applies to more on the perennial side than it does on annuals. So now we get into, you've sowed your trays, you've filled them with soil, and you're having some issues. Well, this is another common mistake that growers make over the years is how they fill the trays, how moist they keep them. Flowers and vegetables actually will germinate a little bit drier than what most people believe. They do not need excess moisture. And excess moisture is just going to lead to pathogens that will cause you seedling decay and loss. So this is a good picture here. This is a cucurbit that was sown in a peat base tray. The trays were brand new. It was a soilless mix. But the grower still had some problems. And in this situation here, that soil was packed pretty firmly into those cells, not allowing oxygen into the roots, and also not allowing the soil to dry out much. And some pathogen got in there and caused a lot of loss for this grower on this particular seeding of melons. So this is a tray here. This is pretty much the way I like to see it. This is a soilless mix. It's got a good mix of aggregate material in there, fine aggregate. So this is a seed starting mix. It has vermiculite, perlite in there. You notice that it's just moist. It's not overly wet, and it's got some moisture to the mixture. And then the 2 rows on the end there have a small dibble in it for running through a seeder, a vacuum seeder, to accept the seed. So again, how I fill my trays is I loose fill the trays. I do not pack the soil in. I make sure that the mix is fluffed up correctly, and then we hand fill our plug trays, so that way we make sure that the cells are filled. I'm not going to say firmly, that they're just filled full, but we do not pack the soil in. That way it leaves air pockets for oxygen to exchange with the soil. Seed starting tracker, this is just a generic one I found online, but for growers that are setting your, if you're purchasing seed, when do I start the seed? So you want to do your homework ahead of time. Have it all laid out and on a calendar so that you know when to start your snapdragons versus your marigolds versus your zinnias, and figure out how long it takes to transplant, from days to germinate and then days to produce a transplant up to your transplant date. And then this way you don't miss something, because when I first started out, I didn't have something like this, and it would come into March or early April, and I was like, oh, I should have started my lavender. I should have started my snapdragons 3 weeks ago, and I missed the date. So that was only 1 year, and then from that point on, I have a pretty solid seeding schedule that I follow by. This is also another item that I use in our seeding. I keep track of the varieties, the crop, amount seeded, the size plug, the germination that's on the package, the germination date that's on the package, the lot number, the vendor. I keep the lot number. The lot number is very important because if you do have a question, maybe something didn't come up right, and you're positive that everything was correct. You can go back to the vendor, and the vendor should have your lot number, but this way you have a record of it as well. And you can just say, hey, have you or any other growers experienced an issue with, Benary giant zinnia? And I know the vendors that I work with, they will always be honest and say, well, no, we haven't heard anything, or well, we have had a couple growers call in this week, and they'll start tracking it. So this information is for your use, for you to track. Getting the seedlings now out to the greenhouse. Now, this is a larger operation, of course, using a spray boom, but as you water those young seeds, whether one thing I didn't cover is if the seed needs light or dark to germinate. That will be back on that tech sheet. If you do cover the seed, generally I cover with just a peat moss base mix, the mix I'm using, or a very fine vermiculite. And that generally will help hold moisture and hold the seed in place. When I get it out to the greenhouse, you're going to use a very fine mist water nozzle to water those trays. If you use a heavy water nozzle, you're going to displace those small seeds, and you will interrupt the seedling, the germination process. And it's going to take longer for that seed to germinate. So watering with a fine mist, absolutely recommend it. Also, one very important thing is, as you're maintaining your soil temperature out in your greenhouse, you don't want to water with just well water. Well water comes out at 55, 56 degrees out of the ground. So I have a hot water tank that I have set on low, and I'm using water that's between 90 and 95 degrees. By the time it hits the top of the tray, it's usually 75 or 80 degrees. But if you're using well water on those trays and you're trying to maintain a 75-degree soil temperature, and you're putting 55-degree water on, you're going to confuse that seed on how to germinate properly. So temperate water is probably one of the biggest tricks I've learned over the years, is to water with temperate water close to the soil temperature, or a little bit over the soil temperature that you're trying to maintain. Underbench heating, this is one of the more common varieties of keeping the soil warm, biotherm heating. It can be expensive. It's another part of the infrastructure. If you're on a large scale, it's pretty much status quo. But on a small scale, you have these large benches, unless you have them split into zones. It's hard to maintain. It's okay if you're starting 100 trays of all one variety, but most growers that I know do not start this many all at once. So again, for uniformity, it's okay if you're growing all one crop on the bench, but most people aren't starting, 20,000 Lysianthus all at once. So on this slide here, this was a precursor to my germination chambers. I was using underbench heat. I built a tunnel over the top of the bench and then used row cover on top of the trays. This worked really great. It was a controlled environment inside the greenhouse environment. The problem with this is you've got to roll up your sidewalls all the time. You've got to reach in. It was hard to work around. You took trays in and out. You had to work around the hoops. It is doable. It worked really great. But I knew I needed something a little bit different. So this was years ago. I think this was probably 35 years ago. It was an old shelf unit that I had, and I put some lights on the underside, and I wrapped the whole thing in plastic and put it in my basement. and the lights were warm enough to keep that at 75 degrees. And I said, hey, this is working pretty slick. And now I didn't have to try to heat the whole greenhouse for just a few trays. I could start 10, 12 trays or heat half of the greenhouse. I could start 10 or 12 trays at a time and then put them out in the greenhouse, run the greenhouse a little bit cooler. So that led to this here, where I built a germination chamber right in my greenhouse. I heated this with a hot water source at first, and then moved it over to a small electric milk house heater. This gave me lights. I didn't need lights in here. I was able to maintain temperature, keep the greenhouse at 55 to 60 degrees, yet keep my germination chamber at 75 to 80. And this worked really good. I still have this today and still use that today. And then I built this one here in the back room of our farmhouse to start things even earlier. And this was indoors. You notice lights on the back. The lights on the back are I think they're just there to make me feel good, not for the plants, because they really don't work the way they're supposed to. The plants, as soon as they come up, you can see a few trays with some green on them there. They stretch right to the lights. So a common question we have is people starting indoors, where do the lights need to be for seedlings? They really need to be 3 to 4 inches off those seed trays, right above the seed trays to do the best job. And again, back to the tech sheets, they will give you usually lumens of what you need, but then you need a light detector or a light gauge to tell you how many lumens you're getting at the soil surface for those plants. I'm not that tech savvy. So what I do at this stage here, we're starting plants in this back room of the farmhouse, and then we move them out to the greenhouse. Some days are trickier than others because it's a little bit of a walk between the house and the greenhouse, and we have to take them in boxes because it can get cold. But notice on the bottom, we used a galvanized tub where I just put a heating element in, a hot water heating element, and that was heating that whole chamber. I can fit about 40 trays or so in that chamber. That was working great until with that hot water, there was no outlet for the humidity. And I actually was keeping the soil too moist. So I have since taken the hot water tub out of the bottom and put a very small little ceramic electric heater in the bottom. And that works absolutely great. Keeps that germination chamber. I have it set on a thermostat, and I can keep the air temperature at about 80, 85 degrees with a soil temperature of 75. This is where we're heading next. Is as we're expanding the greenhouse operation, we're going to start on rolling carts. We actually did last year a little bit. We're going to build a room that is basically, we're going to use a cooler, but run the cooler as a hot room when we're not using it as a cooler. And we're going to put the seedlings right on carts, roll them into the cooler in the hot room, germinate them, and then we can pull the carts right out, roll them right out to the greenhouses and put them on the benches, and save ourselves a whole lot of time in moving trays. Common mistakes. When Lindsay and I first talked, she said, growers will start out on the windowsill or using the humidity domes. And when windowsills, just don't do it. I've talked to so many growers over the years. You think there's enough light there, but there really isn't. And then you've got the cold from the window. Even if you have it on a heat mat, you just don't get the quality seedlings that you should. And on the right there are humidity domes. They're great for starting the seeds, for keeping moisture level and some heat if you have them sitting on a heat mat. But as soon as that sprout cracks the soil, and I call it the knuckle stage, as soon as that knuckle breaks the soil, crack that humidity dome or take it off completely. If you leave it on and you get seedlings like that, you're not going to be happy. The seedling's not going to be happy. And sometimes you're starting over. So generally, when I see seedlings like that, I tell growers, well, you're going to learn from this, but you're going to start another tray right now, or you're going to sow more seed, because those seedlings, again, will never perform the way a seedling that has gone through. If you remember those bean seeds I showed that grew perfectly from seeding to transplant, these will always struggle, and they'll struggle all the way through flowering. Fertilizer. So we're going to cover fertilizer a little bit. This is certainly not a commercial for Miracle-Gro. It was an online photo I could find, but as you fertilize young seedlings, again, treat them like you would an infant. An infant feeds, you feed them little tiny bits often. And that's the same way you're going to treat your seedling. When that seedling first emerges, usually I wait about 5 to 7 days after emergence. Then I start my first feeding. And I'm starting right around 100 parts per million. And I only feed once a week. And then as, excuse me, as the seedling develops, then I start bumping up my parts per million, and 200, 300, 400. By the time that seedling is ready to go to the field, I'm usually at the highest parts per million. But at the same time, if you remember, I said earlier, if you run into some wet weather, that's where you back off on your fertilizer, because you don't want a seedling that's 8 inches tall and stretched out going out to the field. It's just not going to grow right after it's transplanted. This is I started with this years ago, just one of these little siphon injectors. They work great. They're cheap, they're inexpensive, great for beginner growers. And I still have one that I use on a basis around the farm if I'm just want to spot fertilize something. This is a more complicated system here now, where you got multiple injectors pulling in multiple minerals. And this is not my setup. This is at a customer that I go to. And certainly, if you just had one dosatron or one fertilizer injector, I'm using a 20-10-20 Peat Light Special is my fertilizer of choice for most of my bedding plants. So now, how are we doing on time here? So back to this picture here is, remember I said I went to this grower and he thought there was a problem with the seed. Well, it didn't take me 10 seconds. I looked at it and I said, well, this isn't our problem. This is your problem. And he went out in outer space a little bit, and he was jumping up and down. He said, no, that's bad seed all day long. I said, no, it's not. I said, here's your problem right here. And it is one of the biggest challenges that a grower has in greenhouses with seed is mice. You have to be vigilant. They will eat. They love vegetable seeds, of course, but I have lost salvia. They will chew off marigolds. They will chew off seedlings and leave them lay there. And so keep this in the back of your mind. Make notes somewhere. As you start your seedling process, make sure you have mouse traps around. Plain and simple. Just make sure you have mouse traps. Seed is expensive, but time is more expensive. And if you lose a crop now due to mice, now you've either got to reorder seed, or you're calling a plug grower and saying, hey, do you have this to fill in? Well, and then you're going to compromise your crop variety list that you wanted, because you've got to just grab something to get it planted. So traps are inexpensive, easy to use. I bait them with peanut butter, and we put them, usually I'll put them out on the benches, and we put the traps down, and then I take a 10-20 web tray, put it over the top of the trap, put a plug tray on top of it, because mice love to go in and out. of the benches, and they'll go in there, and that's how we keep our mice under control. Now we're gonna go outside a little bit. If you're transplanting things outside early in the season, if you're doing early snaps, early Lysianthus, or direct seeding outside, row covers, you just have a lot of options. You have floating row covers, you have clear plastic tunnels, black plastic mulches, things like that. Those all will help aid the germination and get you a better stand for a good crop. This is a sunflower field on our farm a few years ago. This was a sunflower maze. So we direct sow all of our sunflowers. We do not transplant. I did try it at one point, but I was not happy with the outcome for cuts, for sunflower cuts. So we direct sow everything. This is how we plant our large plantings of sunflowers. We just run right through our corn planter. This is another grower. I just pulled the stock photo, but we have a lot of growers using monosem planters, air planters, if you're planting sunflowers. The problem with these planters is it takes a fair amount of seed to keep that planter happy. And if you're planting only a short row, the bigger planters they're just not feasible, because you're going to tie up thousands of dollars worth of seed in those seed hoppers to make sure that planter's getting uniform stand. So I thought this was pretty ingenious of a grower that was sowing multiples. He acquired all these earthway seeders and put them together, and he's sowing with earthway seeders. We actually have a couple of these on the farm that we still sow seed with, more vegetable seed, but I have sown some flower seeds with using our Planet Junior seeders. This slide here, I know that's eggplant. This is on our farm. This was probably 10 years ago or so. This is something that I cannot stress enough. You've gotten your transplants. You've raised your transplants. They're in the greenhouse. You've run into some wet weather. Do not mud in your transplants. If the ground isn't right, it isn't right. Take the time, keep the transplants as happy as they can be in the greenhouse. In this case here, it looks dry in the picture, which is interesting. I don't know how the camera took that angle, but if you look at the tracks on our crawler, you can see the mud on those tracks. And we were planting eggplant in this instance, and we really wanted to get it in. It was like June 10th, and we said, we've got to get this eggplant in. Well, we put it in. We didn't even really need water in the tank. There was so much water in the ground. We planted those plugs, and they didn't do squat for the whole year. We didn't hardly get any eggplant off of that. The ground turned hard. It turned hard under the plastic. So again, I know this doesn't have a lot to do with raising transplants, but we have had wet weather the last couple of years, and especially in the spring. And sometimes you just got to take a deep breath and step away from the field for a day or two, let the soil settle, let the water percolate out, and then go back to your business of planting. This is actually from Michigan State, but we are going to try this in the future of going through with a living mulch and sowing seed directly in the doing a zone builder and trying to plant sunflowers and zinnias using a zone builder. And this is my last slide. This is a picture of our zinnias on our farm that we do for cuts as part of our cut flower operation. And these are direct sown in the field, in beds. And then, as you can see, we mow grass walkways in between, just for ease of harvest. That is my presentation. I think I've done all right on time. And